Begin with a map of Los Angeles at night, the grid breathing with small lights, and in the middle of it, a building that knows every mood the city can hold. Inside, the court is empty, and the baskets are quiet. In the fall that led to this night, Kobe Bryant kept stepping into that quiet and hearing something like a dare. He wanted the kind of command Allen Iverson had carried for years. That sense that he could call any shot, any time, from anywhere. The numbers reflected it. Early in the season, he took roughly 27 shots a game. He was not shy about the ambition, not with himself and not with opponents. He loved the weight of a night on his shoulders. Yet his head coach wanted something else. Phil Jackson had returned to the sideline with his triangle offense, a structure that spreads the floor and turns reads into rhythms. Trust is the engine. The ball is supposed to move until it finds the right angle, then the right player. It is a belief that 5 can make 4 defenders feel like 3. You can hear the watchmaker in it. The faith that precision is a power of its own. Bryant had bought into that in spurts, especially when the roster could match his hunger. But this group was not stacked with Hall of Fame help. It needed him to ignite possessions, sometimes entire games. On some nights, the triangle's geometry felt like traffic, and Bryant hit the horn. In the rooms where they studied film and drew up plans, Jackson watched Bryant's shot totals climb and gave that familiar frown that meant show me you can lead men, not just light up the net. He had seen this before with Michael Jordan. Before the championships, the pull to win the hard way, alone. Bryant listened, then went out and did what he knew best. The tension in that did not explode. It burned slow and steady. Across the league, the ground itself was changing. The hand check was now a memory, and the bumping that used to ride a driver off his line had been softened. Defenders were told to move their feet, not their forearms. Lanes widened, even when they did not look different. Whistles made room for slashing guards and wings. As a result, scoring swelled. For the first time in nearly 50 years, more than one star crossed 30 points per game. Iverson was there, so were LeBron James and Gilbert Arenas, and at the front of the charge was Bryant, stalking nights that made Arenas hum. Offense was ascendant. The new air favored aggression. Those months showed the dual nature of freedom. When the league gave him space, Bryant drove into it with a ruthless calm, drawing contact, rising from mid-range, stepping behind the line, living at the stripe. He carried teams into deep water, but freedom also feeds doubt when a plan does not land. There was a game in Philadelphia that stung. The city had raised Iverson, and it had a way of measuring heart by the bruise left on a scorecard. Bryant did not find the same rhythm there. The night sat with him on the flight west, and so did the faces of teammates who had run and spaced and watched shots rim out. A leader can talk about trust. He has to show it. Teammates learned the cues in his body language. When he would gesture with a palm down, it meant slow. When his eyes flashed to the corner then dropped, he had already counted the defender's feet. During that stretch, he started to send the ball out of traps faster. He read a second defender, and the third that sometimes came behind, and he trusted the pass a beat earlier. It did not mean fewer points. It meant a different rhythm, a sharper give and take. Coaches and teammates would later say he had always been mentally tougher than almost anyone, able to live at an emotional temperature that would melt most players. Now that toughness started to translate into something the locker room could use. The Lakers needed that shift. They were not lost, but they were not found either. A team's identity is a kind of music. In the first half of that season, their song kept changing tempo. Some nights they moved as one and found wins that felt like promises. Other nights they leaned hard on Bryant as if he were a generator in an outage. The record hovered in the middle. January felt like a crossroads, not a crisis, but a reminder that the West would not wait for experiments to settle. Jackson kept teaching angles and spacing and balance. Bryant kept scoring, and more kept listening. Meanwhile, the Raptors came west with their own problems to solve. Their defense had holes, the kind that show up when rotations are half a step late, and you travel too many miles between contests. They were not the league's standard bearers. If you were the Lakers with a crowd that expected a comfort win, you could look at the schedule and breathe. The opponent did not look like a storm. They looked like a chance to polish the system, to not need a flurry. That is the strange thing about outliers. They do not warn you. They hide inside ordinary dates on a calendar. The night of January 22nd looked simple, until it did not. The psychology of that is worth a pause. A team that believes it should win tends to relax. Who senses he can get to his spots will test the water early, then decide whether to swim or flood the court. The rules of that season and an officiating trend that favored the attacker, along with spacing that pulled big men out of the paint, set the stage for an aggressive player to seize momentum and keep it. Few had the will to keep pressing once they had control. Bryant did. In the afternoons leading up to games like this, players talk casually while trainers tape ankles. The room smells like liniment and new rubber. The conversation loops from opponents to family to food. In that space, Bryant was often half in, half gone, eyes on the screen, rewinding clips that most would not study that closely. He watched how defenders crossed their feet, how high their hands were on closeouts. Whether help came from the baseline or the nail, he was not just looking to score. He was looking for the place where effort turns into inevitability. The Raptors' defense had tells. He noted them. What the numbers miss is the feeling a scorer has when he knows. A lightness settles on the shoulders, a sense you can rise, and the ball will leave your fingers clean. In the weeks before this game, Bryant had lived there in stretches, turning evenings into lessons on touch and balance. He had also felt the edge of the trap, the night that sours, the questioning looks, the sound of 27 shots ringing a little too loud in a quiet locker room. So he began to thread the needle between freedom and trust. He still hunted, only now with a sharper awareness of the pack. Phil Jackson, for his part, was patient without being permissive. He would praise a decision and nudge at the same time. He understood how the season had tilted toward offense, and he knew that fighting that tide is a bad way to teach. Instead, he framed the triangle not as a leash but as a lever. Use it to move help one direction, to isolate a defender who is a step slow, then go. That message found a place in Bryant's game as the calendar turned. You could see it in subtle exchanges. An early post touch just to force a switch. A quick swing to the weak side before the ball came right back, with the defense already leaning. Then the strike. This is the context you need to sit courtside on that night. A star with fresh air around him, thanks to whistle and spacing. A coach with a system that could both restrain and unleash. A team aching for something obvious to believe in, and an opponent that, on paper, made sense as a test run for a tidy win. The conditions were not the cause. They were the weather pattern. Bryant would be the lightning. Still, the argument over what this means for the sport does not start with the number. It starts with the bargain every team makes with its best player. How much do you want him to take when things feel loose? How long do you want him to ride a hot night? When does the chase for a top line become a risk to the bottom of the scoreboard? This bargain changes with context. In 2005 to 2006, the league itself was urging aggression by its very design. Multiple scorers climbed above 30 a night. The floor spacing widened, and free throws became a regular drumbeat. In that environment, individual will become a reliable plan. There was also the simple fact of personality. Bryant had a way of turning criticism into oxygen. When someone questioned his shot diet, He did not close off, he sharpened. When a disappointing game like that one in Philadelphia crossed his path, he did not sink, he recalibrated. He began to find teammates sooner in possessions, not fewer shots, but cleaner looks created for both. He was still the one with the ball as the clock grew thin. The difference was how the first 20 seconds breathed. The morning of the Raptors game, the city woke up to a normal Sunday. Newspapers arranged their columns with the calm that comes when football holds the bigger headlines and basketball sits steady in its lane. At the team facility, the script for the day was not revolutionary. Warm up, review tendencies, find the rhythm that would send people home happy. Cameras caught Bryant in his routine. The same one that would look so prophetic later. Every made shot seen as an omen only in hindsight. He did not need an omen. He needed angles and a whistle that would keep him honest when he attacked. Fans filing into the building that evening carried regular expectations. A little show, a solid win, maybe one highlight they could talk about at work. The Raptors had shot makers, but their defense had struggled with tracking stars who changed speeds and found gaps. You had pulled any two people aside and asked for predictions, no one would have chosen the number that was about to live forever on a banner of memory. Outliers keep their secret until the door opens. There is a reason to linger here at the threshold. Basketball is not just plays and counters. It is mood. It is belief. It is the breath a team takes before the jump ball, and what that breath allows during the next 2 hours. 2005 to 2006 season had taught the Lakers to live with a paradox. Their best version of themselves demanded both obedience to a shape and the courage to break that shape. Bryant had earned the right to decide, in the heat of a moment, which path to take. Jackson had earned the right to expect that choice to serve the team. On this night, those expectations would meet in the middle and ride together for as long as they could. When the players finally stepped into the light, the ball felt new in the officials' hands. The Raptors looked across and saw a star they hoped to tire. The Lakers looked across and saw a defense they hoped to move. In both huddles, the words were simple. Keep the ball moving. Build a wall. Run the floor. Shot by shot. These plans would be tested. Shot by shot, a routine night would bend. The season to that point had been the forge. The triangle taught the Lakers how to space and trust. The officiating climate taught Bryant how to grab the lane and not give it back. The doubts taught him when to lean into teammates and when to take the long, hard shot without apology. The Raptors brought the invitation, in the form of rotations just slow enough to chase rather than anticipate. What followed would be a study in pressure and repetition, and the line between selfishness and responsibility, watched by a crowd that would move from polite to witness as the minutes ran. We are ready to sit down now and hear the shoes squeak and the first layup thud off the glass. We feel that something is starting, though no one can name it yet. The Lakers had spent all season asking who they were. For 2 hours, the answer would sound like one man shooting through light and air and doubt, and like a team choosing on each possession whether to follow the plan or enjoy the ride. Porter would not shout. It would whisper, then build. The second would find a rhythm. The third would open the gate. The fourth would turn counting into an act of faith. We stand at the edge of it now. The ball rising. The night ahead like a road with no turn sign. The shock was already building. It only needed a whistle and a tip. The building never shouted at tip. It hummed. Staples Center on a January night moved like a low current, a crowd folding into the seats with the expectation of something good, not something historic. The court looked bright enough to sting the eyes. The floor shone clean. The banners floated above without urgency. Toronto arrived loose, ball snapping from guard to wing to corner, a touch of pace that suggested comfort rather than fear. The Lakers came out feeling the edges of the game, testing the seams in the triangle, probing the posts in the pinch, waiting to see what the defense gave. Kobe Bryant stood in that soft prelude with his hands open, palms flexing, already reading how the night might tilt if he leaned on it. The first reads were ordinary. Push the ball up, glance for the early strike, nothing clear, build the triangle. The strong side settled into its shape, a post at the block, a guard on the wing, a player in the corner, the weak side stretching as a mirror. Toronto showed no panic. They shaded the wing catch, sat on the baseline slip, and trusted single coverage at the start. Jalen Rose shouldered the first measure of Kobe's weight, a hand up and a chest square, while the help took 2 cautious steps toward the paint, then stopped. The Raptors were content to see if the shine of mid-range footwork would fade against contact. The Lakers were uneven. An entry to the post drifted outside the strike zone. A mid-range touch from the elbow hit back iron and bounced clean. A corner 3. The kind that puts the triangle in rhythm, rimmed out and kicked long. Each miss shook a little confidence out of the home crowd. Not a groan yet, but a shift in posture. Toronto, by contrast, found early air. A pull-up along the right seam dropped. A straight shot 3 feet set and rhythm pure, cut the net like a ribbon. A drive drew a whistle, and 2 free throws settled softly. Within a handful of trips, the balance felt wrong. The Lakers were playing the plan. The Raptors were playing free. Bryant's response arrived by feel rather than announcement. He posted at the pinch, jabbed once to test Rose's stance, then slid left, right, and rose into a clean balanced jumper. The ball spun forward and caught the front rim with a soft kiss, then fell through. Next trip he tilted in transition. One defender backpedaled, another hovered at the dotted circle, and Kobe, catching a hit ahead at the left slot, bounced to a stop and rose into a pull-up 3. It was not a rushed shot. It was a declaration of space. The angle was right, the lift easy, and the wrist stayed up through the drift. The crowd exhaled as though the room had been reopened. Toronto, sensing that single coverage might not hold if the tempo quickened, shifted looks without sending a hard double. They pinched the paint a beat earlier. They shaded a second defender toward the elbow and flashed length at the release. On the sideline, Sam Mitchell pointed and clapped and chose disruption over force. The Raptors wanted to show a different picture each trip, to make the triangle reset and reset again, to keep Bryant shifting his eyes instead of loading his legs. It worked for a stretch. A backdoor was closed. A pocket pass was deflected. A runner curled off the glass a touch too high. Kobe went back to the base of the play and to the base of himself. Set the side, read the tag, attack the fault line. The triangle was never a green light to improvise without cause. It was a map with permission to take the road that opened. Even within that disciplined plan, the season had bent the edge. Hand checks had been softened, freedom of movement favored, and the league had turned toward the scorers who could rise and read in one motion. He had watched the whistles shift that year, not as a gift, but as a fact. It meant if his first step beat the shade, he could get to the nail clean. It meant a bump on the gather would more often be felt at the stripe. So he leaned on the whistle without chasing it. A hard rip through on the left, a pivot back to the right shoulder, and the defender's hand caught his hip. 2 free throws. Next, a split of the hedge on the right wing, a slide between the help and a soft push at the chest. And again the referee's hand came up. 2 more. He took the ball from the official, set his feet, and closed his eyes just long enough to feel the shot before he saw it. 1 breath in, 1 breath out. Snap. The net made that low murmur that only a shooter loves. The crowd felt it. So did Toronto. The Lakers were not catching up yet, but the game had a pulse again. Still, the first quarter belonged to the road team. Mike James held the dribble steady and snapped it high when the Lakers guards reached. Morris Peterson floated to the corners, happy to punish late help. Chris Bosh faced up from 15 and slid a jumper over a late contest. The Raptors set drag screens near midcourt and asked the Lakers to chase. then found the easy space left behind. Staples grumbled and then steadied. The horn to end the quarter sounded like a chance to renegotiate the terms. The Lakers trailed, not disastrously, but with a weight that asked questions. Between quarters, Bryant's world narrowed. He sat, towel over his head for a moment, then stood before the huddle with the quiet that comes before an argument or a statement. Phil Jackson's voice was low and plain. Build the triangle. Trust the reads. If the early window is there, take it. If not, grind the side, reverse, and cut hard. There was no plea to chase numbers, no command to stop. The triangle was confining to some, liberating to those who studied the seams, and the staff believed he knew the seams. He had spent years hearing that you push. Look early, then you build, then you read the reaction, then you go where they are soft. He nodded once and stared past the whiteboard. The second quarter opened with a stumble. A turnover on a pressured entry ran the other way for two. A long miss gave Toronto another chance to step into rhythm, and they did not miss it. The lead stretched, and for a short window the Laker offense looked like a radio sliding out of range. That was the moment when an ordinary game either slides quietly into a long night or something in it sharpens. Bryant stepped back in and asked the defense a direct question. He caught on the left wing, faced and held the ball lightly. Pivot left, pivot right, a shoulder dip, a pump, and then a single hard dribble to the baseline. The contest arrived late. He rose, hung, and sent a fade off glass that fell with a gentle thunk. Next possession, he came off a weak side curl and took a bump before the catch, kept balance, gathered, and went straight up from the nail. Clean, Toronto decided to test another look. They showed a soft trap on the sideline to turn him back, then retreated to their matchups, counting on the shot clock to do the work. It forced the triangle to flow late, forced a cut into traffic, and pushed the ball back to the top. That is where Kobe's footwork drew the map again. One controlled step to freeze, a second to create the angle, and the shot was off before the help arrived in full. Possession later, he ran the floor, received the ball in stride and snapped to a stop at the arc. A quiet step back that let the defender drift past. The three landed without argument. The noise in the building changed pitch. Not loud yet, but brighter, as if the vowels had sharpened. The deficit refused to move in more than a few points, but the terms within every trip were different. The Lakers stopped bleeding turnovers. Lamar Odom worked from the mid-post and found small angles for cutters. Mush Parker attempted to press the lane and at least change the geometry, even when the layup did not fall. Kobe filled the gaps that remained, which meant more shots, not as a revolt against the offense, but as a consequence of its answers. Run the side, wait for the overplay, cut into space, reverse, catch and shoot. The one open window kept reappearing at the same handle, and it had his fingerprints on it. Games like this hold a strange tension before they become famous. You feel a player getting warm. You sense the defense giving up small bits of ground. The numbers climb, yet the scoreboard will not tell the same story. Toronto bent without breaking. They hit timely shots that quieted the room. A late hand from the elbow made a clean look a little tougher. They drew a foul on a flat drive, then sank the free throws. The pile never moved enough to turn heads. It was only heavy enough to demand effort. Bryant was not chasing applause. He was chasing the next clean beat. He cut under the post, reversed, and rose with a sliver of space from 15 feet. Splash! He checked the lead foot of his defender, sold hard left, then snapped back right into a pull-up, a touch off balance and still pure. He treated the extra space this season allowed with care. If a reach caught his forearm on the gather, he went to the line and made Toronto pay. If they bodied him early, he waited and let the release draw the call, not hunting contact, just recognizing that the league now prized clarity on the ball. Amid these small storms, a thought kept crossing the bench. How long do you ride this rhythm within a structure built to spread responsibility? The triangle had always been about planned action, programmed play, and a patient ambush of the weak link. But the philosophy was never blind to the night in front of it. If a path stayed open, you took it until it closed. If a path stayed open, you took it until it closed. On a playoff court years before, Phil Jackson had watched stars carve within the system, rather than against it, because the shape had created those carvings on purpose. The question here was not if Kobe was breaking anything. It was whether the defense had any answer if the pattern kept resolving to the same spot. Late in the second quarter, the pattern crystallized. The Lakers ran a tidy sequence with a post touch, a weak side exchange, and an inside-out pass that faked high, then went low. The ball found Bryant on the right wing with a defender still pivoting. He rose before the closeout arrived. The three dropped, and the bench stood without celebration, unmatched to the moment. On the next trip, he refused a screen and took a half step toward the baseline, then pulled into a mid-range jumper as the help slid to take a charge. He stopped short and let the defender's momentum go past. It felt less like heat and more like control. The halftime horn sounded like a door pushed halfway closed. The score still leaned toward Toronto, a steady, irritating lead big enough to matter. Bryant's line had climbed into the mid-20s, a bright mark on an otherwise smudged page. He did not pound his chest. He did not talk to the rafters. He walked with the same deliberate pace he kept when a game was quiet, towel at his neck, eyes level. It seemed the dribble was still alive in his head. Unfinished momentum followed him down the tunnel. Unfinished momentum followed him down the tunnel. In those minutes off the floor, you can picture the talk because the shape of the game required it. If the triangle tells you to build and read, and the read keeps pointing to the same shooter against the same defender, do you honor the plan and feed the loop until it closes? The old school answer might have been balance at all costs. The smarter answer, and the one this season's lessons had been gently teaching, was that trust runs both ways. If you pass and the shot comes back to you, because your teammate trusts your moment, you are inside the plan, not outside it. Bryant had spent the year walking the border between individual will and group rhythm. He had also begun to understand that the team does not vanish when the ball stays with him, not if the cuts are honest and the reads stay clean. Behind the chalk and film, there was a second pivot. The league had tilted to make room for nights like this, yet it also demanded new discipline to move inside that space. Not long before, Bryant had played in Philadelphia and walked away staring at the floor, regretting choices that chased numbers more than wins, and that feeling stayed in his chest. He wanted scoring freedom as an edge, not as a scarf. The first half against Toronto offered something more delicate. It showed that if he read the structure in good faith, the outcome could still be a stream of shots with his name on them. That is not selfishness. That is clarity. When the team stepped back onto the court, everything looked the same and felt different. The Raptors still warmed at the elbows and wings, still split the lane with guard penetration, still trusted that their lead could live if they stayed disciplined. The Lakers still framed the side, still probed for reversals and back cuts, still put the ball in the post to draw eyes. Yet the room inside those movements had tightened around one man. The coaching staff did not need to say it out loud. If the first look was clean for Kobe, you would take it. If it was not, the ball would find the next right place. The triangle was a machine, and on nights like this its engine could be one piston. The air and staples took on a thin crackle you could not see, but could feel in your chest. People leaned forward without knowing. The scoreboard still asked for a climb. The rhythm in Bryant's feet said the climb had already begun. The third quarter waited on the edge of an answer. One last shot from the half held the key to what would happen next, not because of the points, but because of the decision. In the closing minute before the break, the Lakers ran two actions that did not free anyone clean. With the clock bleeding, the ball swung to Bryant late, not as a bailout, but as a choice to end the possession with the most stable hand. He caught, rose with a defender within scent distance, and buried a contested jumper that drew a quiet snarl from the net. Teammates slapped the back of his head as they ran back, not in worship, in agreement. The plan did not need to change much in the third. It needed conviction. He untucked and raked up his jersey at the line before the inbound. He tugged on the waistband once, looked left and then right, and softened his shoulders like a sprinter shaking free of the last small tightness. Toronto gathered at the top of the key and gestured to each other, palms flashing, a small debate about how much help to send and when to send it. The whistle blew to summon them to the floor. The ball kissed the referee's palm and then bounced back up to meet Bryant's hands. The sound in the building hung between hush and hunger. The first half had been a slow burn, a test of patience, and a question of principle. It had also been the kind of half that tricks memory, because the numbers sat heavy while the building felt manageable. The lead was real. The tension was not yet crisis. The offense was disciplined, and still one player had begun to swallow it whole, not through rebellion, but through obedience to its most basic command: find the weakness and keep pressing. The triangle had produced the same answer enough times that it stopped being an answer and started being a premise. Now the premise would be drilled to the core. Bryant bounced the ball once, twice, 3 times, and tilted his head toward the left wing. The scoreboard threw its cold truth across the court. The Raptors bench stood. The Lakers bench showed that thin, fixed smile a team wears when it is about to test its own courage. No one in the building could name the number coming. They could feel the direction. The third quarter opened its mouth. The third quarter begins with a quiet that feels like a held breath. The Lakers break their huddle and spread into their familiar triangle shape, but something in the spacing has changed. A soft tilt toward one man. Kobe drifts from the weak side elbow to the wing. Palms open. Shoulders loose. Eyes already mapping a lane that does not yet exist. He catches, pivots middle to pull the help an inch, then slices back baseline on a curl that slips past the first contest. The jumper rises clean from the short corner, a simple stroke to start the count again. It is not a proclamation, more like a marker in wet cement, the kind that dries faster than anyone expects. Toronto answers with patience. They keep the coverage honest at first, a single defender face up, help hovering a step inside the paint. The league has changed in small, decisive ways, and Kobe knows it. Without the old hand-checking clutch, without the forearm steering that used to blunt a first step, he turns a shoulder, and the frame of the defender becomes leverage. The geometry of the court narrows for the man in front of him and widens for him alone. A rip through, 2 hard dribbles, a sudden step through with the right knee sliding past a hip, glass and in. There is an early whistle on a separate drive, a brush at the waist that once would have been shrugged off as nothing, now respected as freedom of movement. He walks to the line, still and focused. Bounce, bounce, breathe. The first free throw snaps. Bounce, breathe. The second follows. Out of a timeout, the Raptors try a soft zone, bodies gathering at the elbows, a hand flashing toward the pocket pass that would normally feed the high post. The triangle recedes as template and returns as discipline. Spacing holds, corners stay low, the top fills and empties on cue. Lamar drifts into a screen and refuses the roll, staying in place to clip the hip of the chaser a second longer. Mush enters the ball, then vacates with purpose, clearing a side without a hand raised. Kobe reads it before the screen even settles, darting into a curl that carries him toward the nail. He plants, spins, and floats a one-hand push that finds the front rim and falls soft. It is the kind of quick strike that punishes the half-step between a scheme and its execution. The Raptors toggle to pressure. A hard trap springs near the sideline, and for a moment, the ball looks contained. But Kobe's dribble retreats so low it nearly scrapes the floor. Shoulders turning like a key in a lock, he threads the gap, a knife's edge between two bodies, then gathers into a long step and lifts through contact. The layup counts, and the whistle arrives half a beat after the net. He does not celebrate. He turns, takes the ball from the official, and completes the extra point with the same stillness. The pace bends to his will. He is not sprinting. He is dictating rhythm, using hesitations like commas. He shifts from a drifting jog to a sudden drive that forces a back pedal, then stops on a dime when the big retreats to the restricted arc. His shot diet sharpens with each trip. Some attacks finish at the rim, where arms slap down and the whistle speaks again. Others are pull-ups from the elbows that feel certain the second his feet align. And then come the threes, the backbreakers that arrive after a stretch of downhill force. When a defender sags to brace for contact, he rises without warning, toes just inside the hash marks. The ball arcs quiet and returns louder than everything around it. Toronto rotates their cast of challengers. A longer wing shadows to blunt the rise on the jumper. A stronger guard tries to jam space at the point of attack. A forward shades middle and dares the baseline, then arrives late. Every adjustment has a counter already waiting in his feet. He is curling tight around screens now, shoulder scraping a chest to create a sliver of daylight. When the help jumps early, he slips the ball to a teammate and relocates without pausing, catching it back near the slot where the angle for the next shot is already warmer. He is making a tiny bank shot with his body, cashing in fractions of space that most players never see. Phil Jackson's presence on the sideline hovers like a weather system rather than a command. He does not rush a timeout after a make, does not signal for drama. He trusts the structure he returned to this team to provide, and he trusts the man at the center of it to apply judgment. Bryant had craved freedom, had admired the untethered green light of a friend who lived on the edge of chaos. Now the freedom exists within a lattice of habit, and that makes it more dangerous. The triangle's grammar remains, but he is writing with it instead of being written by it. Possession after possession, Lakers teammates accept roles that batter doubt. A backside screen stalls a helper just long enough to make a layup look open. A simple swing pass moves side to side and pulls a defender's eyes for a blink. That is enough for Kobe to cut across his face and take the return. There are trips where he gives up the ball out of a trap. He circles back into a pocket never meant for him, then rises and fires as if the offense were timed to his breath. The passes that leave his hands still carry trust when the angle is gone. When an early double leans, he zips a skip to the corner. When a soft zone shrinks, he threads a bounce to a cutting big. These small exchanges turn a solo into a symphony, even when one instrument plays lead. The crowd lives each step with a growing belief that they did not walk in with. Early in the quarter, you hear the release on a close jumper, the kind of instant thud that signals a crowd not yet humming. Then a second later, a swelling sound. As the run deepens, that delay shortens until the impact and the roar are almost the same moment. People stand earlier in the shot clock. Photographers lean forward and stop checking their frames. Every time he rises, there is a hush that is not quiet at all. An intake of breath from 12,000 lungs that makes the air feel different. A sequence captures the new pace. Defensive rebound. The ball hits the floor twice in Lamar's hands, then finds Kobe streaking up the wing. The defenders are back, two of them, layered to deny a straight line to the rim. He slows for a step as if to read, then accelerates through a seam that did not exist a second before. Backhand gather catches one forearm, the reach-in catches his wrist, and he lifts anyway, extending the ball high off the glass where neither contest can reach. He backs away as it drops, a small nod, A glance to the bench. The scoreboard keeps changing. You do not need numbers to feel it, only the way the building shifts on its foundations. Toronto refuses to fold and tries a new answer. They pre-rotate a man to the nail and send a quick dig when he takes the first dribble. He adjusts by catching one step deeper, closer to the elbows, where a single jab threatens two directions. He leans middle and fades baseline, a shot that looks like a retreat until the net argues otherwise. Next trip, the dig transforms into a full double. He holds for just a breath, eyes steady, then feeds the high post and sprints to the weak side corner. The ball comes back through hands like a relay baton, and by the time he receives it again, the defense has pinched toward the paint. He steps into a three and pauses at the top of the release like a diver at the edge of a board. It is clean. There is a quiet after the roar now, a kind of humming that means the audience no longer needs to be convinced. The whistle favors attack because that is how the game is being officiated this season. Drives that would have ended with a body on the ground and no call now end with a march to the line. Kobe exploits this not as a search for charity, but as strategy. He tests the line between strength and control, feeling where the arm arrives on his hip, tracing the angle of a forearm across his ribs. His free throws become both rest and blade. The repetition narrows his focus and amplifies the pressure on a defense already trying to manage his rhythm. Defenders grow more cautious on the next possession, and that sliver of caution is the window where the jumper lives. Between possessions, there is a strange calm. He does not point to the rafters or pound his chest. He walks to the sideline on a dead ball, listens to a few words from his coach, says less back. In another season, he might have tried to prove a point to prove who he was. Now, sharpened by criticism and hungry for respect instead of headlines, he proves the point that matters to this room. Make the right read. Make the next shot. Pull this team back into control. The trust he asked for from others, he shows in return with passes at the right time and with movement that allows them to matter. Leadership is often described like noise, but here it sounds like timing. There is a moment when the Raptors choose to attack him on the other end, to force energy from defense to dull his blade on offense. He tracks a drive, plants, and draws a charge at the edge of the lane. The crowd explodes because it feels like story logic, and also because it steals a possession. He pops up, expression set, then sprints into the open floor on the next change of direction. The defense thinks pull up. He gives pull up in the hips, then extends to the rim with the kind of elastic stride that erases space. Contact, glass, count it. The Lakers run a sideline out-of-bounds set that looks like a page torn from an old book and scribbled in the margins. Luke flashes, retreats, and screens. Kobe sets his man up with a half-step toward the inbounder, then whirls away down the lane on a tight curl. The pass leads him without slowing. He plants with 2 feet, rises through the crowded heart of the lane, and drops a banker as if it belongs to him by right. Another time, they flatten the floor and ask the defense to live on an island. He leans on a shoulder, watches the dig step in, and pirouettes backward into a fade that lands soft, a shot that feels polite and cruel all at once. As the quarter stretches, the ball starts finding him even more quickly, because everyone sees what is happening, and no one wants to interrupt it. A touch at the elbow that would have been a swing to the corner in the first half is now a decoy for a hand back and a drive. A screen that would have rolled to the rim is now a screen that empties the side and dares the help to choose. The triangle's bones keep the floor balanced, while the heartbeat pumps through his choices. This is the synthesis many had wondered about. Could a system designed for harmony yield to a soloist without cracking? Tonight, the answer is not words. It is a rhythm that feeds upon itself. It is a rhythm that feeds upon itself. The Raptors, to their credit, do not stop changing looks. They go back to single coverage to keep rotations honest, then spring a trap the moment he turns. They shade a forward toward the nail and try to live with contested twos. They switch a smaller man onto him to chase, then a larger body to bump him off routes. He treats each with the same cold study, storing the reaction from one possession and pulling it out 2 minutes later when he needs it. When the smaller chaser sits on his waist to deny the curl, he plants, reverse pivots, and steps behind the screen into open space for a three. When the bigger forward tries to body him mid-post, he rips baseline and uses the rim as shield. There is no panic in the counters, only a deepening certainty. By the back half of the quarter, the deficit is more memory than fact. The scoreboard feels like it has surrendered to light on his side. You can see it in how Los Angeles runs back on defense with the kind of quickness that comes from belief. You can see it in how Toronto sets their jaws in the extra effort to contest even when the ball arcs impossibly high. The bench on the home side has stopped talking and started standing, hands on heads, grins breaking. Players who are supposed to be framing pieces are now choosing the exact angle for the frame and holding it steady, proud to do it. At some point, you realize that every make now adds to something larger than the lead. It is not about a hot streak. It is not about one mismatch being hunted. It is the sense that he has compressed multiple versions of himself into one sustained run. The relentless downhill driver, the mid-range technician, the patient passer, the cold-blooded deep shooter. These do not arrive in random order. They arrive in response to coax and constraint, to what the defense thinks it can force. He's not fighting the game to bend to his will. He is using what the game offers to move a step ahead. He walks to the line again. Bounce, bounce, breathe. The crowd moves with his cadence now. A mass inhale and exhale trained to his rhythm. He syncs them both and stares down court, eyes close to blank. Years of media scrutiny and questions about whether he could lead as more than a scorer do not live in this moment as noise. They live here as edge. Each possession is proof by demonstration. He is not sharing the ball to appease. He is sharing it because the shape of this quarter demands it for the next shot to be as open as this one. He is not shooting to feed ego. He is shooting because the cracks in the defense are present and widening, and someone has to press them open. And then someone has to press them open. Then, a shot that feels like a switch being thrown. He brings the ball up himself, the defense backpedaling to the arc, as if guarding against a drive for once. He crosses left to right, plants and pulls from a step behind the line, range that belongs to the few who trust their work and their legs this late in a run. The ball stays in the air too long for comfort. When it drops, the sound is a tearing as much as a cheer. The Raptors bench throws up hands in a mix of disbelief and discipline, like they know the only answer is to keep answering. Like they know the only answer is to keep answering. The Lakers' sideline explodes in the contained way teams do when they are still in a fight, bodies bouncing in place as if on springs. Out of the next timeout, they do not draw up anything new, only a cleaner version. The Lakers run a set that looks familiar, but the first pass is lower and quicker. The second screen arrives a half step earlier, cutting off the defender's chase. Kobe glides into the lane, hangs and finishes with a soft kiss off the glass while a forearm rides his shoulder like a wave. The whistle comes late, but it is inevitable. He completes the three-point play with the same ritual and jogs back, already turning to line up the next assignment. This is what the takeover looks like when it is not a tantrum but a tide. Each wave rises from small motions, steady edges that gather into something larger. The third quarter turns into a study in how a star controls pace, not by racing but by choosing where and when the game breathes. Toronto tries everything within reason because that is what teams do, yet the holes still appear. Los Angeles shapes itself around the run, not as spectators but as the quiet machinery that keeps it humming. It is the screen that makes contact, the relocation that pulls a help foot 3 inches farther than it wants to go, the touch pass that turns a double into a late contest against air. By the horn, the arena does not feel like the one that watched The first half. The deficit that once drew whispers of frustration now feels like a distant rumor. People are on their feet without a cue. Cameras track him even when he only walks to the bench and sits. He does not raise a finger or pound his chest. He does not raise a finger or pound his chest. He exhales, sips water, studies the floor for a heartbeat, then meets the eyes of a coach who once asked him to lead without burning the room down. The answer, for one quarter, is in the score and in the faces of teammates who keep finding him, because they know he will find them in return when the defense finally commits. Something rare has begun, and everyone knows it. There are two ways to watch now. You can watch the game as a contest, one team climbing over another on the way to a win, or you can watch the performance inside the game, the number building with a logic all its own. The smarter choice is to watch both until they fuse. The quarter has turned a simple question into a sharper one that does not ask for politeness. If he cannot be stopped, how far will he push before the night has to push back? You can feel the Raptors asking themselves a mirror version. How do you slow a man who makes the right play when you send help, and the right shot when you do not? You can feel the Lakers answering with small actions that say, ride it until the horse needs water. The triangle waits like a reliable roadmap in the glove box, useful if the road vanishes, happy to be ignored when the highway is clear. The team has found its balance in something that is, to the outside, imbalance. This is the paradox that split opinion then and defines memory now, and it is why the next minutes will carry more than points. They will carry argument and legacy, and the feeling that sport is at its best when control meets risk and refuses to blink. The horn hands the game to the fourth. The horn hands the game to the fourth. The run is alive, and the air tastes like possibility. The fourth quarter opens with the strange calm that follows a storm. The deficit that once nagged at the home crowd has melted, and yet the building hums with new tension. The number beside his name is already outrageous for an ordinary night, and he keeps pulling eyes back to the scoreboard as if it were a living thing. Mid-50s. 3 digits feel like a faraway myth, but the room senses something gathering. He jogs to the wing and breathes through his nose, slow and even. The same 2 count that has been with him since high school gyms and empty mornings. One more possession. One more red. Toronto shows their first intent on the opening action. A hard double the moment he touches. The ball disappears into the traffic, then returns to him on a quick swing from the high post. The schemes that once tried to cage the triangle are now feeding it. A pin down here, a dribble handoff there, and he slides to the left slot. He rises. The legs are heavy from 3/4 of sprints and stops, but the base is sound, shoulder square, wrist soft. The 3 snaps the net and leans the knight forward. The crowd's sound bends upward. Not a roar yet, more like a rising note, and you can feel everyone realize they are now watching a chase. The next trip turns into a knife fight. A guard shades him, a wing shadows his right hip, and a big lingers at the nail. He probes, pulls back, and scans the floor. He does not rush. He settles into the ritual that has kept him tethered since November. 1 breath, 1 jab, a heel-to-toe plant, then a sudden inside-out dribble that splits the bluff of a trap. He glides to the free throw line and stops on a dime. The pull-up is clean. The pull-up is clean. When it drops, a few people stand in the corners of the lower bowl and do not sit again for a while. Toronto answers with a quick 3. The Raptors have fought all night, and they are not ready to be a backdrop. They keep punching at the scoreboard, hoping the math of pace can cool this one stubborn flame. On the next defensive stand, he slides to the block, plants a forearm in a chest, then digs at the post entry to break the rhythm, poking the ball off a shin and out of bounds. It is a small win, an unglamorous beat, and it buys the breath he needs. He nods to himself, as if to say the other side of the ball is part of this bargain too. There is less triangle now in how the offense breathes, but its spine remains. A guard brings it up, touches the wing, then cuts through. The big steps up to set a higher drag screen. The spacing is honest and purposeful. The next action is simple, a clean lane to the elbow. He takes it and meets a thicket of hands. The whistle comes as arms collide. At the line he dribbles 3 times, inhales, and on the exhale the first free throw is pure. The second follows the same way, the same forward lean, the same soft wrist. This season, the officials promised freedom of movement, a reading that shifts the burden to defenders, and he treats that promise like a court reporter, taking what the era offers without apology. You can sense a new logic overtaking the Lakers' huddle during a dead ball. There is encouragement, a few tapped chests, a grin that says, "Keep going." The plan is stripped down to the bone, no pretense of balance for its own sake. They are not abandoning each other so much as funneling through the one teammate who has caught a current no one else can feel. Within the structure, their coach long preached, possession by possession bends toward the hot hand. This is not mindless hero ball, not tonight. It is agreement. It is trust in a kind of thunder that cannot be diagrammed but can be harnessed. They trap him again on the right sideline and it looks nasty. 2 bodies walling, a third lurking. He steps his left foot across as if to split, then stops and pivots back, shielding the ball. His back heels kiss the paint on the logo. The pass out is there but arrives delayed, and he waves it away. He dips under the overreach and snakes up the boundary, then pulls from 22 feet with a defender still chest to chest. It is the sort of shot that turns coaches gray. It is also the sort of shot a certain species of great player learns to make late in their career more than they miss. The ball finds the bottom and the trap starts to feel like a dare. Now the sounds mesh into layers. Disbelief from visitors, wonder from children in the aisles. A low buzz from season ticket holders who thought they had seen everything and are recalibrating what that means. After another stop, he takes the inbound and initiates himself. No point guard touch, no exchange. His teammates flatten the baseline, a small rebellion against orthodoxy the staff allows, because the night has absorbed the rulebook. He saunters left, crosses hard, then rises at the top as if stepping onto a ledge. The release is a metronome tick. The follow-through holds an extra beat. The 3 makes the net whisper again. Someone behind the basket begins to count out loud, uncertain at first, then louder. 60. The word does not echo so much as widen. Toronto digs deeper into the well of coverage. They flash a zone, then abandon it mid-possession when he threatens the gap. They body him on the perimeter and give up the cut. He finds the window, catches a pocket pass, and flips a high glass kiss off the wrong foot before the big can time a block. His face on the jogged back is not celebratory. It looks almost blank. This is the part outsiders sometimes mistake, the emotionless look that hides a wild storm of attention and memory. He has trained it so that stitching together one more play feels like tying a shoe, so that each made shot does not spike an adrenaline crash he will pay for later. The Raptors score with a corner jumper to stay within reach, still believing. On the next trip, an early drag screen gives him a shoulder of daylight, and he jabs twice, sells a rise, then darts through 2 arms to the rim. He lands in the crowd of paint, and a forearm bites at his elbow. Another whistle. Back to the line. 3 dribbles, 1 breath. Back to the line. He does not stare down the scoreboard when the number flips. He touches his toes to the nail, sets, and repeats. 19 out of 20 would be an astonishing professional night from the stripe. And he is hovering near that perfection. Efficiency is not a buzzword here. It is the geometry of a game bending toward inevitability. There is a steal that feels like a quiet prophecy. Toronto tries to push off a rebound, a hurried outlet that floats too long, and he steps into its path without drama. Hands ready, eyes soft, then gone. 2 dribbles, and a layup. He lands and looks to the sideline as if to measure how much time is left to take from the clock, not to showboat. It is defense feeding offense, the kind of connective tissue play that keeps the run from being only a series of highlights and makes it a tide. By now, the bench spends more time standing than sitting. A teammate slaps him on the shoulder after the whistle. Another points to the floor, to the spot where the next brush screen can open breathing room. The compact between star and roll is brighter now, sharpened by practices when he did not always bend, and by games when he hunted shots to prove a point more than to secure a win. Tonight, the paradox is plain. He is taking almost everything, yet it does not feel like theft. The next three comes from the left wing off a stagger that looks like a zipper cut. He slows his last 2 steps just enough to rock the defender, then rises without a hitch. The contact at the release draws a murmur from the lower bowl and a raised hand from the nearest crew chief. It counts for 3 and 1 more. He walks to the line as the scorer's table fixes the tally, and people in the building start to understand they are not watching a hot quarter, but walking beside a record. The free throw follows the same routine and obeys. 70 is the kind of number that makes a crowd change. It is not a cheer anymore. It is a chant, a ritual happening in real time. They begin to say the number as if it were a name for luck. The visiting bench looks like a group watching weather they cannot influence. The faces are not embarrassed, they are unmoored. Some stare down, some look out into the stands like travelers waiting out a delay. The Raptors throw another press at the point of attack and gamble for deflections. He shrugs free, takes one long dribble to the elbow, then turns his back to the basket and fades over a shoulder that has seen this move in 1,000 empty gyms. Midrangea in a league that is starting to worship the three, the stubborn art he refuses to leave behind. It is easy to forget, when the arc of the ball keeps finding the net, that this season has not been only this. There were nights when shots felt heavy, and the doubt that visited Philadelphia crept back in. There were nights when sharing and trust did not come easily. There were nights that made his coach sigh and reach for parables about balance. The months also carved space for responsiveness, for listening to the rhythm of the game and to the teammates who were trying to build it. The forward sprints into a screen without a touch. The guard waits a half beat, then swings the ball back on a riposte. The big seals his man to open the lane. These are votes of confidence. He reads them and keeps going. The officials call a touch foul on the perimeter as he tries to turn the corner, the kind of hand check that would have been ignored in another era. The interpretations of this season are not an accident. They are part of the landscape. The league wanted offense to breathe, to let scorers move and craft angle upon angle without getting chiseled by constant holds. It does not hand players points without work, but it tilts the stage. He has spent all winter memorizing those tilts, cutting at them like a sculptor who knows where the marble will yield. There is a stretch deep into the quarter where the game becomes a series of echoing beats. Stop, receive, rise, trap, split, stop, pivot, release, whistle, dribble, breath, swish. Toronto manages a runner to keep the score from breaking wide, and he replies with a caught and shot 3 that seems to leave his hand before the ball fully arrives. Someone in the crowd yells that there is time left, as if urging an author to write a few more pages while the ink is good. The bench has spilled onto the court. After makes, tapping his back, pulling him into small circles of celebration before the next inbound summons them back to attention. The number inches toward the part of the record book most fans have only read about, second only to the league's most untouchable monolith, the century mark from a night in an older, different game. He is not challenging that ghost. He is carving a path to its doorstep and setting a marker that says modern players can still visit the impossible. On a late possession, with a trap coming high, he waves off the screen and takes the space alone. He drives hard to draw contact, then stops short and floats the ball just over outstretched fingers. The ball kisses the front rim and crawls in. He stares into the middle distance for a blink as the arena swells like an instrument blown hard. In the final minute, breath is currency. Fatigue nips at his stride, so he reaches for the habits that turn tired legs into routine. He lengthens his exhale. He sets his feet with almost obsessive care. The Raptors foul to slow the clock, and he walks back to the stripe that has heard 1,000 of his private bargains. 3 dribbles, then a pause. The first is pure. He takes the ball again, repeats the ritual, and the second is pure. 81 becomes a living thing on that board. A number the building will say back to itself for years. A number that changes what children believe is possible when they go to sleep. The horn is less a finish line than a release valve. The bench rushes him, not to worship, but to touch proof. The crowd lingers in their seats, in case the night has one last trick. Across the floor, the visitors gather with quiet dignity. This is a professional league, and pride cannot crowd out the handshake line. He finds an embrace or two, then drifts toward center. From there, he can see the people who cheered him through, and the ones who will go home and argue about what they just saw. He did it on numbers that do not look like recklessness. 28 made field goals on 46 attempts, 7 of 13 from beyond the arc, 18 of 20 at the line, a profile not only of magnitude but of poise. It is not perfect, because nothing in this game is, yet it sits nearer to surgical than to wild. The line will circle the globe. It will crawl the bottom of screens and trip into conversations with fathers and sons. It will also poke at a tender place in the sports culture, the ongoing tug between individual will and collective weave. In the hours after and in the years ahead, this night will serve as a map for people headed in opposite directions. Some will point to it as proof that in a league opened by rule changes and quickened by new spacing, one player can tip the whole stage with skill and nerve, and that every teammate on the floor helped by trusting that tilt. Others will say that even at its most beautiful, this style risks turning 5 into 1, tempting a great player away from the harder work of caring while sharing. Both sides will find their case in the film, because it offers a hymn to freedom and a lesson in discipline. If you only watch the makes, it is easy to miss how the team trusted the small practical things that let a man score like this without the roof caving in. There was a quiet baseline exchange that created a window. A forward who sealed a helper to buy half a step. A guard who waited for the defense to finish its rotation before slipping the ball back to the source. A coaching staff that did not flinch or seize the possession-to-possession rhythm with a raised hand, and a play call when the better choice was to let the room breathe. This is how a night like this can live inside a team instead of sitting on top of it. He walks off having turned the ordinary air of a regular season night into an atmosphere people will feel long after, whenever he comes to mind. He once longed to play with the freedom of his peers, and wondered how much to share. Now he has found how far that freedom can go when paired with mastery. It does not solve everything by itself. It does not lift a trophy, mend every relationship, or make every criticism vanish. But it reframes debates and arms a legacy. It dares anyone in the building to forget where they sat when the chant turned into a number, and that number into a story they will retell for years. The camera following him catches the small, tells that a box score can never catch. The way he tucks his jersey back in and squeezes his eyes closed, as if saving a copy of the moment in a private vault. The way he pats a teammate's chest after a bump that hurt but bought him breath. The way he looks up one last time, not so much at the number, but at the people around it, the ones who witnessed it. The night will only grow in the retelling, as nights like this do. But that quiet look is the anchor. It says the work was real. It says the cost was real. It says the hunger that drove him here might yet point to a larger meal. If you listen closely beneath the chants that still echo as people file out, you can already hear the next argument starting. Was this the purest form of excellence a team can embrace? Or the most seductive temptation it must resist? Was it a glimpse of what a modern rulebook and a virtuoso can create together, or a reminder that the hardest game is not one a single player bends to his will, but one he bends toward everyone else without losing himself? Those questions will not be settled by a number alone, not even one this loud. They will be answered in the quieter seasons ahead, when sharing, leading, and trusting turn from ideas into banners. As the roar settled into memory, the argument began in earnest, not in press rooms, but in the space between highlight and doubt. What did 81 actually mean, beyond the chant and the box score, beyond the instant mythology of a number that sounded impossible in a modern arena? It was more than a torch moment, less than a complete answer, and exactly the sort of performance that forces a league to hold a mirror to itself. Was this proof of a system working, or a system breaking? A star filling the empty spaces of a roster, or a star remaking the geometry on his own? The night asked it quietly as the confetti of noise fell. What should greatness look like inside a team game? History framed it before the floor even cleared. 81 is the second highest single-game total the National Basketball Association has ever recorded, behind only Wilt Chamberlain's 100-point night, which came in a different age with different expectations. Chamberlain played without a three-point line in a league built for size and paint gravity. Bryant scored in the three-point era against layered defenses that could not hold him. The contrast does not settle the debate, it sharpens it. If two peaks rise on two different maps, how should we read the climb? What feels unprecedented is not only the number, but also its texture, its efficiency, and its control in a time built to spread offense across many hands. The league itself had shifted underfoot. In the season around that night, referees were told to cut down on clutching and holding on the perimeter, and to emphasize freedom of movement, which opened lanes for creative scorers. The effect was immediate and obvious. It became one of those rare years when multiple players averaged over 30 points a game, with Kobe Bryant among them, and Allen Iverson as well. LeBron James and Gilbert Arenas did it too, a burst of scoring bravado not seen in almost 50 years. The airspace widened, and the whistle rewarded footwork and balance. The same constraints that once slowed wings now yielded ground to skill. It did not create Bryant. It created room for him to be fully visible, letting his choices carry farther and cut cleaner. Context matters, but it is only the stage. The play was a clash of philosophies that followed him all season. In the fall he chased the freedom he admired in Allen Iverson, the right to take and make as many shots as the game allowed. By early counts, it was nearly 27 a night, and he carried the weight that came with it. His coach, Phil Jackson, believed in the triangle's trust and spacing. He wanted the ball to move until a good shot appeared, not be claimed by one hand on principle. He respected the result, yet winced when the offense bent too far into isolation. Between them lived an uneasy truce, a test of how will and system might share. In this light, the feat becomes a prism. From one angle it looks like licensed anarchy, a star drawing the oxygen until only his fire remains. From another angle, it feels like a precisely timed override, the moment a structure yields when the best choice is not a pass or a cut, but the same decision made again, without apology. From yet another angle, it sounds like a chorus behind a soloist. Those shots did not appear without a screen at the right shoulder, without space cleared on the weak side, without quick relays that brought the ball back to his reach. The triangle did not vanish. It thinned and stretched, then focused its light, and asked the other four players to believe. Awe arrived first. It always does when the human frame refuses an ordinary ceiling. Observers called it a masterclass in variety, a night that swept from three-pointers to drives, from mid-range balance to free throws, earned through rhythm rather than flailing. Efficiency gilded the volume, which is why the disbelief carried gratitude instead of fatigue. But admiration shared the room with unease. If one man can decide so much, then what happens to the shape of responsibility? Does it flatten into a single column that might crack in spring? Should a regular season game be asked to carry that weight? The question hovered over the celebration, tracing the edges of the smile with a pencil of doubt. Phil Jackson's reaction echoed that nuance. He had known the younger Michael Jordan, who pulsed with the same need to go and keep going until the clock ran out of breath. He admired the craft, winced at the imbalance, and kept coaching toward a version of the triangle that could hold this kind of weather without breaking. By that spring and beyond, he would still wrestle with the cost of unrelenting attack, how it strains emotions as well as schemes. For Bryant, the line between necessary aggression and corrosive loneliness was thin. Nights like this made it thinner. They invite power and invite isolation, sometimes in the same possession, a paradox that fuels the wonder while sketching the bill that will come due later. Yet the number alone could not explain why so many inside the game admired him beyond the tally. Coaches like Greg Popovich pointed to what a shot chart cannot show: the cold steadiness, the acceptance of responsibility whether the rim was wide or narrow, the work that started before sunrise and stayed. Teammates spoke about the demand he put on himself first, then on them, and how, even on a night that looked solitary, he kept asking for the same small courtesies that make a group function: a timing step, a screen angle, a read on a back cut. This was not chaos. It was many small agreements held together by one will. The critique, though, does not vanish simply because the craft is sound. Some called it empty calories, a gorge against a defense not equal to his speed, a spectacle that would mean little when matchups tightened. Others argued that the game only turned when his volume rose, which was itself proof that the roster asked him to carry more than a human should. Both claims say the same quiet thing. They say the structure was not enough, and that truth cut two ways. It validated Bryant's choice to take more, and it underscored Jackson's fear that the method could not scale into May. The tension between those positions kept the team honest and slightly on edge, a live wire humming under victory. Era context deepened, that wires hum. With freedom of movement protecting slashers and pull-up savants, the league tilted toward creators who could read a seam in half a beat. Bryant lived in that tempo, but so did Iverson, James, and Arenas. What separated this night was not only will, but placement. The Raptors tried zones and pressure and switches because they had to, and the new officiating left them little else. The first bump drew a whistle. The second step found daylight. Elite scorers bloomed in that window, which is why 4 of them carried 30-point averages together for the first time in almost 5 decades. The environment raised the ceiling. Bryant reached through it because he kept doing the next simple thing well. And still, the numbers leave out the weather inside his head. He had known the heaviness of missing in public, the way a cold night in Philadelphia could echo longer than a good one in Los Angeles. He had pushed for the freedom to fire whenever the reed said, yes, then wondered at times whether that freedom hardened into a cage. Over the season he began to fold more trust into the same appetite, learned when a pass was not surrender but investment. On this night that lesson did not disappear. It just became more precise. Trust looked like a screen set on time, like a return pass thrown to a pocket of space, like the knowledge that the other 4 were still with him. The irony is that dominance can be the most isolating form of leadership. When every possession tilts your way, you inherit not just the shot, but the mood of the room. A miss feels like a broken promise. A make feels like oxygen you owe again in 12 seconds. That is the bargain Bryant accepted when he chased Iverson's freedom, a bargain that thrilled and drained in equal measure. It can unspool a locker room if resentment grows, or braid one tighter if everyone sees their role reflected in the win. This is why teammates' small decisions mattered so much. A head nod after a decoy cut said, "I see you." A high five after free throws said, "We are still us." Zoom out again, and the era's current keeps tugging. The league had tilted towards stars because that is what an entertainment engine and an evolving understanding of skill will do. But the very same changes that freed scorers also demanded more intelligence from defenses, more layers of help, more practice in living with impossible shots. Toronto tried all of it and lost. That failure did not make their plan foolish. It made the performance rarer. Most of the time, new rules distribute opportunity, not destiny. They open the door, then the room decides who can live there. On this night, Bryant walked through and then rearranged the furniture, placed himself in the center, and asked the game to keep turning around him. The comparison to Chamberlain will never resolve, and maybe it should not. Different cartographies make different summits. What matters here is how this peak clarified the debate. If a team game must always defer to balance, then this night is a heresy you admire from afar. If a team game must reward the best option over the ideal diagram, then this is doctrine. Jackson's discomfort, even with the scoreboard smiling, tells you how hard it is to coach at this intersection. You preach trust, then watch the trust take a form that looks like repeated isolation, even as it relies on silent coordination. You defend the principle, then nod at the exception, and try to teach your room how to live with both. The response outside the locker room spilled into arguments about meaning. Was it padding in January, or a shard of something that would become leadership later? The criticism often reached for the word selfish, because a number that large feels like it must have been taken from someone. But listen more closely to the people on the floor, and you hear a different word repeated. Responsibility. He wanted it. He asked for it. He worked for it when the lights were off. And over that season, even as he kept firing, he also started to absorb that responsibility in ways that did not show as shots, in small trusts that stacked toward spring. The box score could not index those increments, but the room could. There's another layer the number cannot hold, and it lives in fatigue. The body resists becoming a myth. It wants rest and rhythm more than it wants headlines. What makes a night like this so unusual is not only the makes, but the absence of variance that usually humbles even great players. He moved from three to mid-range, to rim to free throw line, and kept the thread without slipping. That took more than touch. It took a mind rehearsed enough to trust routine on command. Dribble count, breath, rise, land, repeat. The room watched the ritual and answered with a small work that allowed it. A screen here, an outlet there, a pause to let him breathe between whistles. By the next morning, television argued over what the night proved. Some panels turned it into a referendum on the age, as if new rules had cheated the past, or the past had shamed the present. The wiser view accepted that eras speak different dialects, and that greatness, to be honest, must be bilingual. Bryant's 81 did not erase balance or teamwork. It forced them into conversation with individual will at its outer limit. The same season that gave scorers more room also asked leaders to translate that room into something their teammates could believe in. He spent that year learning the verbs of that translation. Not just score, but show. Not just tell, but teach. Not just take, but give back on time. What would that translation cost when the stakes rose again? The horn that night did not end the argument. It only changed its shape. In the quiet after the roar, as jerseys are peeled away and tape is cut away, the questions return, harder than the cheering. Could one player bend a team game that far and still carry that same team to a place where banners are earned in June, not headlines in January? The next seasons would answer with fire before they answered with trust. The man who had just scored 81 was not finished testing how much of basketball could be taken by will. The next spring, the scorebook thickened with outbursts that felt almost defiant. He put up 60 against Memphis, a cruel unraveling of a game that was over as soon as it began to belong to him. Then came a run of nights when 50 was the floor, not the ceiling, as if he were writing a new grammar in which repetition was the point. 4 straight games in March, and the league could only track the quantity and shake its head the stamina it takes to hunt that many points while guards lean on you and help defenders lurk under the rim. At times it looked like joy, a scorer in full control. But there was also an echo, a loneliness no amount of noise could cancel. He said as much between post-game smiles. The roster was not enough. The support was thin. He did not hide his frustration, and the air chilled in the franchise corridors when those words reached ownership. Phil Jackson stood on the same sideline he had once shared with a young Michael Jordan. And most nights you could see him hold 2 truths at once. The system asked for cutting, timing, and trust, while a player's instincts, shaped on empty courts before dawn, told him to decide. Jackson had a name for it, an understanding that a star could be both a release valve and a rupture. He let the rope out, then drew it back, letting the triangle breathe around a man who, in those years, took about as many shots as a modern guard could, without breaking the offense. It was not always graceful. It was not always tidy. It was real, and it pushed everyone, teammates and coaches and executives, toward a necessary choice. The league did not stand still while this unfolded. Defenses tightened their traps, sent longer arms and quicker doubles, and tried to steer the ball to places his rhythm could not reach. Officials whistled the clutching and grabbing that freed scorers to move, which helped and hurt in equal measure depending on the night. The conversation swelled online and on television. Was it beautiful? Was it reckless? Was this what it took? He heard it, and did not look away. There's a cost to being undeniable, and in those seasons he paid it in fatigue, in bruises that did not heal before the next tip-off, and in relationships that frayed under the weight of constant demand. Help arrived with a shape that changed the geometry of the offense. A 7-footer with soft hands and a patient mind who could catch at the elbow, flip his hips, and see over traffic. When Paul Gasol crossed the threshold into that locker room, the triangle exhaled. The ball could now reverse and arrive at a second creator who did not need dribbles to be dangerous. Angles reappeared that had been flattened by necessity. He trusted quicker not because he no longer could score, but because the pass now solved as many problems as the shot. It is one thing to say, trust your teammates. It is another thing to look up and see a teammate. It is another thing to look up and see a teammate who can carry a possession to the rim without you. That year ended in Boston, where green banners hang like memories turned into cloth. The series bruised more than bodies. It pressed nerves that had been raw since the first post-Shaq seasons. The Celtics closed space, crowded his air, and made the offense choke on its own impatience. The loss was not a collapse so much as a conclusion. The team had moved back into the right rooms, but it still had to learn how to breathe together when a defense tried to squeeze the oxygen out of June. He walked off that floor knowing there were steps left, and the path there would not be lit by step-back jumpers alone. The next June, the story curved in a cleaner line. Orlando could not guard every point of attack. The triangle hummed at a speed that forced the defense to choose wrong again and again. He did the work that scorers do when they have help they trust. He took over when time and score asked, and he created when gravity pulled second and third defenders toward him. The series belonged to Los Angeles in a way that did not surprise anyone by Game 5. He lifted the finals' most valuable player trophy that had hovered just out of reach since the early three-peat days. He had proven a point that does not fit well in a highlight reel. You can be the son of an offense and still give warmth, not just light. But the year after sealed the argument against the same city that had pierced them. It went 7 games against Boston, every possession dragged to the pace of doubt. By the time Game 7 inched into the fourth quarter, he had missed more than he had made. The shoulder and the finger had their say, and the Celtics recast him as a rebounder and a cutter, daring him to keep shooting until Los Angeles lost patience. He did not. He shifted. 15 rebounds from a guard who once judged nights only by the net's soft swish. Hard boards ripped down in traffic, because winning sometimes asks you to become a different player than the one who made you famous. He chased shooters. He bodied bigger men on the glass. And when the defense bent toward him again, he found the open man. A corner three from a teammate who had ridden the rough years with him dropped like a promise finally kept. The star turned and told the world it was his trust, not his points, that closed the series. And when the buzzer settled, confetti fell on a truth that looks simple from the cheap seats and complicated from the floor. The title does not care how you get there, only that you brought everyone with you. After that he changed, yet he was still himself. The edges of his game softened just enough to invite other hands into the paint. He watched more film, went to the post more often, and found cutters with eyes that once looked only at the rim alone. In huddles, his voice moved from the hard slash of command to a teacher's tone, the sound of a veteran who could see where a play would break before it did. He still took the last shot most nights, and no one wanted it otherwise, yet he carried the weight more steadily, which let the room breathe. The debate that began on the night of '81 did not disappear. It matured. It became about choices, not absolutes. Then the body did what bodies do. The miles that had been hiding in his legs stepped into the light. His Achilles tendon snapped like a too-tight cord in the same year he dragged a young team into the playoff picture through sheer obstinacy. He shot his free throws and walked off without help. That image meant many things to many people. And one was the simple truth that talent fades while the mind and the habits keep insisting. He worked back, again and again. Shoulders taped, fingers splinted, hours stacked into mornings most of the world never saw. The speed lost a step, the lift a half inch, and he replaced what was gone with timing, with angles, with a craft that had always lived just under the surface. On the last night, he took it all back once more. 37 years old, wearing a jersey that had become a talisman for a city holding on to one more season of memory, he scored 60 points. They did not come in a flood like that winter night a decade earlier. They came in surges, in old moves rehearsed again, in an arena that had learned how to live with goodbyes. It was not a playoff game. It was not a banner night. It was a conversation between a player and a crowd that had watched him make a career out of audacity. He caught, pivoted, rose, and the net acknowledged him. Teammates cleared space like stagehands. Opponents let the game unfold with a respect that felt less like surrender and more like understanding. He was not chasing ghosts now. He was finishing a sentence he had started as a teenager. When he thanked them and set the mic down, it was not a period. It was an M-dash into whatever came next. The ledger is neat for historians. He scored 33,643 regular season points, a total that may rise or fall on the all-time lists, but will always point to a man defined not only by volume, but by pressure applied in critical moments. He won 5 championships across eras and rosters, earned 2 Finals Most Valuable Player awards that arrived late enough to matter twice, and claimed 2 scoring titles in seasons when defenses knew exactly what was coming and still could not stop him. He added 2 Olympic gold medals, adapting his game to a role that asked for leadership and defense as much as isolations. In Los Angeles, 2 jersey numbers were retired in his honor, a private language between a franchise and its star about beginnings and reinvention. He spent 20 seasons with one team, a span that made his growth public in a way few athletes endure, with every rough year and every breakthrough visible in shared daylight. But the record book was not the one he carried into his next act. He took the habits that built him: early mornings, steady notes, patience for detail, and turned them toward story. He made a short film about a boy falling in love with a game. It was drawn in lines children could understand, and adults could feel. The Academy handed him a golden statue for it. He built spaces where young players could learn to break down film the way he had in hotel rooms after games. He mentored stars and rookies, women and men, as if his competitive fire could be refined into a clean flame others could cook with. He coached his daughters and sat in the bleachers like any parent, sketching small truths that do not care how many rings you once wore. From there, the line runs back to the night when 81 points felt like a dare to the universe. The lesson he drew was not that he could score without limit, though he could. It was that concentration and preparation carve out a freedom inside chaos, and that freedom can be shared. The shape of his legacy holds both the solitary storm and the quiet pass out of a double team. It also holds the debate we still have about whether a system should bend to a star or a star should bend to a system. And it reminds us that the best outcomes usually ask each to give an inch. He proved that one person can carry a game for a night, then carry a team for a season, and then learn to divide the load so it can be carried all the way to a parade. The comparison that hovered over it all, the 100 to the 81, will never find a truly fair court where both can be tried the same way. Different eras, different defenses, different rules about contact and spacing and pace. What survives the argument is a shared awe at what a human being can do when preparation meets opportunity and refuses to blink. He was not 7 feet tall. He did not live above the rim forever. He learned footwork like a language. He learned counters to his counters. And he read the game the way some read music. That is the secret running through the numbers on his page. You can admire the totals without understanding the work, but you cannot explain the work without the totals answering in the background with a kind of proof. There is another unresolved thread that those who watched from the outside cannot tie up. The cost. It is there in the tape jobs and the surgeries, in the seasons when joy had to be coaxed back with small wins that would have once felt beneath him. It is also there in the relationships rebuilt after public frustration, in the way time lets apologies find the right ears. He and the owner whose name sits on the rafters found their way back to a common pride. He and the coach with the stack of rings found a groove that left them both changed. He and the city rarely needed to speak, because nights like 81 and nights like Game 7 had taught them a shared language. When a player whose presence was that large leaves the court for good, the game tilts in ways you only notice later. You see it when a new guard pulls up in transition because he grew up on film of a tough shot over perfect defense. You hear it when a young star talks about routine and focus and credits a mentor who texted after a loss, not with comfort, but with a question about foot placement. You feel it when a championship team fights through a cold shooting night and wins with defense and work on the glass. And someone brings up an old clip of 15 rebounds by a guard you once thought was only points, until one night proved otherwise. So how did a regular season game turn into 81 points and then echo all the way to a fifth ring and a final 60? The simple answer is that he could and wanted to, and the league gave just enough space that night for the work to show. The fuller answer is that the performance existed inside a web of teammates and schemes and rule interpretations, and it taught its author as much as it taught its witnesses. He learned that the same intensity that shreds a defense can also hold a locker room together if it knows when to release the ball and when to attack. He learned that leadership is not a static quality, but a set of choices repeated until they become a reputation. He learned that greatness can be solitary for a quarter, then shared for a series, and still belong to one person without being owned by him alone. The number fades a little each year, the way all numbers do. New totals arrive. New seasons layer over old ones like paint. What remains is texture. It is a season that began as a promise to prove he could be free again, ran into the limits of that freedom, and found balance only after trust took root. It is a career that measured itself first in points, then in parades, and ended with a last flourish that felt like a thank you in the only language he ever needed. The night of 81 did not crown him. It pushed him toward the work of becoming the kind of champion who could share the stage and still own the moment when it counted. It remains a once-in-a-generation takeover, not because it cannot be repeated. It endures because it revealed the path from solitary storm to shared triumph, and dared anyone watching to ask what they would do with that kind of will.